Most people never think about what happens behind the cold, steel doors of a morgue. They don't wonder what it's like for the people who work there, the ones who are surrounded by death every day. But what if I told you that the real horror doesn't come from the bodies, but from the things that shouldn't be moving, speaking, or even breathing? Tonight, you're about to hear the stories that no one talks about. The ones that happen when the doors of the morgue close, when the lights flicker out, and when the refrigerators are filled with more than just the dead. These aren't stories of ghosts or spirits, but something far worse. Something that crosses a line between the living and the dead. Meet Carl, a morgue attendant who thought he had seen it all. But one night, as he worked alone in the refrigerated room, something happened that would change his life forever. It started with a noise, a soft tapping coming from one of the body drawers. He laughed it off at first. A rat, maybe? But then it started to happen every night. At first, Carl thought it was his imagination, but soon he couldn't deny the truth. Something in that morgue wasn't quite right. Something that should have been lifeless was moving, watching him. And when Carl opened one of those drawers one night, he found more than just a body. He found something that no human should ever have to see. But the real question is, what do you think is really going on in the morgue at night? The truth is stranger than you could possibly imagine, and it's a truth that's been buried until now. Carl stood frozen in front of the body drawer, his hand still gripping the cold steel handle. The tapping sound had stopped, but the air around him felt thicker, heavier. His breath was shallow, each inhale feeling like a struggle against the oppressive silence of the morgue. He knew the sound he had heard wasn't normal. It wasn't a rat or a faulty refrigeration unit. It was something alive, something in the drawer with him. He slowly pulled the drawer open, every nerve in his body screaming for him to stop, but he couldn't move. There was a body inside, just as there should be, pale, lifeless. The skin of the deceased was an eerie shade of blue. Nothing seemed out of place, except for the faint, barely perceptible movement of the chest. Carl blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The chest rose and fell. His heart skipped a beat, panic flooding his veins. Was the body breathing? Impossible. There was no way. No one could survive being in the fridge for days, let alone move like that. He stepped back, his mind racing, trying to rationalize the impossible. He thought it could be some kind of bizarre after-death reflex, but the longer he stared, the more it seemed like the body wasn't just moving. It was watching him. The eyes, still closed, felt too aware, too alive. Carl slammed the drawer shut, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He took several deep breaths, trying to steady himself. This had to be a trick of the mind. Maybe the isolation was getting to him, making him imagine things. But when he turned to leave, he heard it again, the tapping, louder this time, faster. He turned back to the drawer, but this time it was different. The body wasn't where it had been before. The drawer was slightly open again. Before he could move, the lights flickered above him, casting long shadows across the morgue. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Carl could see his breath forming in the cold air. He felt the unmistakable presence of something moving in the shadows, something that shouldn't have been there. His skin crawled. He had to leave. But as he turned to make his escape, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the room. Slow, deliberate steps, coming from behind him. Carl didn't look back. He ran, stumbling over his own feet, his heart racing. He reached the door to the break room, but as he pushed it open, it slammed shut violently, trapping him inside. He was trapped. The door wouldn't budge. The room felt like it was closing in on him, suffocating him. Panic set in, and Carl pounded on the door with all his strength. shouting for help, but there was no answer. There never was. The footsteps were getting closer now. Too close. Carl turned around, only to find the refrigerator drawers opening on their own. The bodies were moving, shifting. One by one, the drawers slid open, revealing their contents. And then he saw it, a figure emerging from one of the open drawers. It was not a body at all. It was a man, covered in the same blue, lifeless skin, his eyes open wide, staring directly at Carl. But the man didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply pointed toward Carl. Frozen in place, Carl could barely breathe. The figure's finger pointed directly at him, and he knew in that instant, whatever was happening in this morgue, it wasn't just supernatural. It was a warning, a message. Carl ran again, but the lights flickered and went out completely, plunging him into darkness. He heard the shuffle of feet, but this time it wasn't the bodies. It was something else, something worse. The last thing Carl saw before the darkness swallowed him was the figure standing in the center of the room. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. And then the tapping resumed. The darkness seemed to pulse around Carl, pressing against him from every side. He stumbled blindly, his hands groping for any solid surface. He was certain that someone was following him just out of sight. The cold was unbearable, but it wasn't just the temperature. It was the unnatural chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. It wasn't just a morgue anymore. It was something far worse. His heart hammered in his chest as he scrambled towards the exit. But just as his hand reached for the door handle, a sound froze him in his tracks. A soft, raspy whisper coming from behind him. Carl, his body went cold. He didn't dare turn around. The voice wasn't from any living person. He could hear it, feel it, all around him. It was like it came from the walls themselves, from the very ground beneath his feet. Carl, it's too late. You shouldn't have looked. The voice was haunting, dripping with an ancient malice that seemed to drag the air out of the room. Carl could feel his sanity slipping away, piece by piece. He turned, finally, unable to resist the pull of the voice, and what he saw made his blood freeze. The man, the figure, was standing in front of him now, its face just inches away, its eyes wide open but unseeing, locked in an eternal stare that seemed to pierce through Carl's soul. The man's lips moved again, though no sound came. Then the figure opened his mouth in an impossible, grotesque way, as though it stretched beyond human limits. Carl's stomach lurched. Suddenly, the refrigerator doors opened with a violent crash, revealing several more bodies, each one slightly different. Some were frozen stiff, while others were unnervingly limber, their arms stretching out toward him as though reaching for something or someone. Carl backed away, his feet stumbling over his own legs. The figure continued to inch closer, its breath cold against his skin. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. You were curious. Now you'll stay with us forever. Carl's mind raced. What had he stumbled upon? What was this place, this morgue, really hiding? It wasn't just a place where the dead were kept. It was a place where the dead waited. For what exactly? And why had the bodies in the refrigerators come to life? The figure in front of Carl suddenly jerked its head toward the open refrigerator drawers. Its eyes widened in a way that should have been impossible, its mouth curling into a grin that stretched too far. Carl could feel his pulse in his throat, the pounding rhythm of fear. Then, the figure slowly reached into its own chest, as if it were peeling itself apart, revealing what was underneath. A mass of writhing, blackened tendrils, moving with a sickening slowness. It pulled something from within, something small but alive. A tiny, distorted hand. The room felt as though it was suffocating him, as if the air was thickening around him. His vision blurred, and the whispers seemed to echo in his head, like 1,000 voices screaming at once. "Carl, come closer, we need you." The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a chorus, each voice twisted and contorted in agony. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. But somehow, his body forced him to take a step forward. His legs betrayed him, moving toward the figure, toward the writhing mass. Just as his hand reached out to touch the figure, the lights flickered back on briefly, and Carl saw it. The truth. The walls of the morgue had disappeared, replaced by a void, endless, black, and cold. The bodies weren't just waking up. They were calling out, pulling him in, and as the figure's grip tightened around his wrist, Carl realized that this morgue wasn't just a place of death. It was a prison for the dead, a place where they waited for new souls to come and join them in their endless torment. And then, just as quickly as it began, everything went black. The last thing Carl heard was the tapping again. But this time, it was coming from within him. Carl's body felt heavy, as though it were being pulled down into the earth itself. The darkness that swallowed him was suffocating, and for a moment he thought he had passed out, drowned in the blackness. But then the weight on his chest lifted, and a cold, ragged breath filled his lungs. He gasped, his eyes snapping open, expecting to see the same void he had been swallowed by. But instead, he was lying on the cold, steel floor of the morgue. The same refrigerator drawers. His body screamed in pain, but his mind was worse. The whispers were gone. At least, they seemed to be, until Carl realized they weren't whispers at all. They were voices, low, guttural, filling his mind with thoughts that weren't his own. "You belong here now, Carl." The voice was so clear, so real. His head snapped to the side, eyes wide with terror. But the morgue was empty. No figures. No bodies moving in the drawers. The cold was overwhelming, but still, something was wrong. He forced himself to sit up, but his body refused to obey him, as though it were no longer his. He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling as he placed them on the cold floor to push himself up. They didn't look right. The skin was pale, almost translucent, as if it had been drained of life. "No, no, no!" Carl's mind screamed. He tried to move again, but the pain in his body was intense. A deep, crushing agony, as though his muscles had been pulled apart and stitched back together wrong. The morgue around him seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the air thick with dread. Carl's breathing grew ragged as he looked toward the rows of body drawers. He saw them now more than just bodies. The drawers were empty, yes, but they were not clean. The metal was worn, rusted with years of neglect, and the names etched into the drawers. Names he didn't recognize, names that seemed to have been erased and rewritten, were no longer legible. They were changing. Carl's vision blurred again, and when it cleared, the names were different. The bodies inside were different. He tried to call out, but no sound left his throat. His lips parted, but only the silent, suffocating breath of the morgue escaped. Something was moving again, not from within the drawers, but from within Carl. The tiny hand that the figure had pulled from its chest, the hand that had reached for him, now moved inside of him, pushing through his ribs, clawing its way out from within, as though it were trying to live. Carl screamed. At least, he thought he screamed. The sensation of it tore at him, twisting his insides the way something alien, something ancient, sought to break free from him. His skin began to tear as the thing inside of him worked its way out, its jagged, twisted form pressing against his flesh, forcing him to the ground. And then The doors to the morgue slammed open. Carl's head snapped toward the noise, but his body refused to turn, his limbs locked in place by something that wasn't his own will. He could feel his eyes, his gaze, his consciousness slowly slipping into whatever had taken root inside him. A figure entered the room, and it wasn't human. It wasn't even something that could be called figure. It was an essence, something far beyond form, something that flickered and twisted between the realms of the living and the dead. A creature, a force, calling Carl toward it. It was the one thing Carl had feared from the very beginning. The thing that had always waited in the shadows, watching him, waiting for him to cross the threshold into something far worse than death. The creature moved closer, its shadow creeping across the room, and Carl felt himself being pulled in, drawn toward it. He could feel it, the presence, closing in on him, pushing him toward the abyss. "It's your turn now," the voice said again, but this time it was not in his head. It was in the room. It was a creature speaking to him, its voice deep, hollow, and filled with the promises of endless darkness. Carl wanted to fight, to escape, but his body was no longer his. It was a vessel for something darker, something far more ancient, and with one final surge of force, Carl was dragged into the creature's grasp, his vision going black once more. The tapping resumed, and this time it wasn't Carl. It was something else, something that had taken root in the morgue, something that would never leave. Carl's vision was fading. The room, the morgue, everything was becoming a blur, a distant echo that no longer mattered. The cold metal beneath him, the rusted drawers, the flickering lights, it was all slipping away. But the voice, that voice, continued to echo inside his mind, twisting and warping with every passing second. "You're not alone." The last thing Carl saw before everything went black was a figure. No, the essence, standing over him, its eyes glowing with malevolent, unnatural light. And then nothing. When Carl woke again, it wasn't the sterile, suffocating cold of the morgue. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark, vast, and cold. He could feel the pressure of the air around him, the heavy, thick darkness pressing in from all sides. It felt familiar, but wrong. And the tapping, he could hear it again, louder now. Carl tried to move, but his body felt strange, alien. His hands twitched, but they were not his own. His legs, his arms, everything was wrong. His thoughts were distant, fractured, as though someone else had taken residence in his mind. He wasn't in control anymore. And then it hit him. He wasn't alone. A voice, his own voice, spoke to him from the depths of his mind. "You should have never looked. Now you'll stay here, just like all the others." Carl wanted to scream, but no sound came. He wanted to fight, to break free, but his body wouldn't obey. His eyes locked onto the dark, formless shape standing just beyond his reach. The figure was there, watching, waiting, and then, in the silence, Carl realized something. The tapping, it wasn't just the bodies. It was the living. It was Carl, too. But the real question remained, who was still alive? In that moment, Carl knew something deeper, darker had taken place in that morgue. The souls of the dead weren't just trapped. They were waiting for the next body to claim, the next soul to take. And as Carl's vision dimmed once more, he understood the horrifying truth. The morgue had never been just a place of death. It was a recruitment ground, a place where the living and the dead merged, where souls were recruited to become part of the prison. And now, Carl wasn't just a victim. He was a recruiter, but it wasn't just his fate. It was everyone's. If you disturb the dead will disturb you. And Carl, He wasn't the first, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. As Carl's fate turns into something even darker and more sinister than simply being a victim, the story ends on a chilling note, suggesting that the morgue isn't just a place of death. It's a place where the dead recruit new souls. This opens the door for endless speculation and a powerful invitation for viewers to comment, share their theories, and discuss the dark twist that Carl has now become part of this horrifying cycle. Before we continue, let me ask you something strange. Have you ever felt like someone was standing just outside your field of vision? Not close enough to see, but close enough to feel? Would you even know if something had been following you? Quietly for days? This next story might make you wonder about that a little more than you'd like. What if I told you that some funeral homes aren't as peaceful as they seem? That behind the closed doors of these supposed sanctuaries of rest, something far darker lurks? We've all heard the rumors, but what if the truth is even more terrifying? What if the dead aren't really dead? Tonight, we're going to uncover the shocking experiences from those who dared to step into these chilling places. And trust me, what you'll hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about life, death, and what comes after. The story begins in a small, isolated funeral home nestled at the edge of town, out of sight, out of mind. To most, it was just another place where the dead were laid to rest. But for those who worked there, it became a living nightmare. The whispers started small. At first, just strange noises, scratching sounds, as though someone was tapping from inside the walls. But when the staff went to investigate, there was nothing but an unsettling silence, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. One evening, a young mortician named Tom was alone, preparing the next body for viewing. He had done it 1,000 times before, calm, methodical. But as he turned to retrieve his tools, a cold gust of wind swept through the room. The lights flickered and then the body moved. Not just a twitch, but a deliberate, unmistakable shift. Tom froze. His heart raced. He knew the dead weren't supposed to move. He stepped back slowly, unsure whether his mind was playing tricks on him. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A shadow moving in the shape of a figure, standing in the doorway. He was alone, or so he thought. Did you know that, according to experts, the sensation of being watched in funeral homes is far more common than you might think? In fact, a study published by the University of Edinburgh revealed that nearly 70% of funeral home staff reported unusual events, like cold spots, flickering lights, and even strange sounds at some point during their careers. But what if these aren't just coincidences? Here's a chilling fact. The belief that spirits remain near their bodies after death is more widespread than we realize. In fact, there are ancient beliefs that souls can't move on until they've been properly laid to rest. But what if some spirits never leave? In fact, one of the creepiest phenomena associated with funeral homes is something that's rarely talked about: spiritual imprinting. In 2003, paranormal investigators in Chicago discovered that certain rooms in old funeral homes were hotspots for strange energy. They found that the atmosphere itself seemed to record the emotional intensity of the people who entered. And if that energy wasn't cleared, it would leave residual traces, often manifesting as disturbing sensations or even physical movements. Imagine now, you're sitting alone in the parlor of one of these ancient funeral homes, the air thick with an unnerving stillness. You hear nothing, except for a faint creaking sound from the hallway behind you. At first, You tell yourself it's just the building settling, but then the noise gets louder, more deliberate, like footsteps moving closer and closer to where you're sitting. But when you turn around, the hallway is empty. There's no one there. It's moments like this that make you question everything. And according to some of the most chilling reports, it's not just staff or visitors who experience these phenomena. In fact, some funeral home directors have gone on record, stating that they've seen objects shift on their own. One director claimed to have witnessed a set of keys, lying perfectly still on a desk, suddenly slide across the table, as if guided by invisible hands. And in another instance, a candle was seen flickering wildly, its flame dancing unnaturally, despite there being no draft in the room. It's as if the very space around them becomes alive, filled with energy that refuses to stay contained. The most unnerving thing about these stories is not just the supernatural events themselves, but the pattern they seem to follow. Across the world, from America to Europe, these eerie experiences often happen in funeral homes that have been standing for decades, sometimes centuries. And it's not just the old, creaky buildings that carry this curse. Even new funeral homes, built on land that had once been home to battles, riots, or executions, have reported similar hauntings. It's as though the land itself remembers the trauma, passing it down through the years like a dark inheritance. There's an ancient belief that the spirits of the restless cannot rest in peace unless they're acknowledged, unless their deaths are recognized. And in some cultures, it's said that the dead are connected to the earth they once inhabited, unable to move on until their remains are honored. But what if these spirits, these lingering presences, aren't just seeking peace? What if they're searching for something far darker, something that might just change everything we know about life and death? Now, imagine being a funeral director who's seen it all. The comings and goings of grief-stricken families, the preparations for the final goodbyes. But even they can't explain the unsettling events that have taken place in their own homes. One director, after decades of service, described the feeling of something or someone watching him, especially late at night when the building was empty. He would hear heavy breathing, as if someone were standing right behind him. When he turned around, no one was there. He told me, it's as if the building itself remembers the dead, and sometimes it doesn't want to forget. In another chilling story, a young funeral home worker was cleaning one of the viewing rooms late one night. As he wiped down a table, he felt an ice-cold breeze rush past him. Though every window was closed and the air conditioner was off, the room seemed to shift. The shadows in the corners grew deeper, stretching unnaturally, as if they were reaching for him. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a whisper echoed through the room, so faint it almost couldn't be heard, but just clear enough to make out. "I'm not ready." Was this a voice from beyond the grave? Or was it something more sinister? It's difficult to say, but one thing is certain. Strange occurrences like this have been reported across multiple funeral homes, leaving us with one disturbing question. Are these homes haunted by the spirits of the dead? Or is something darker at work here? Something that's not bound by the rules of the living or the dead? But what if I told you there's something even more unsettling? Something that goes beyond the idea of restless spirits. Some paranormal investigators believe that funeral homes, especially those built on or near ancient burial grounds, act as conduits, places where the veil between our world and the next is thinner than we could ever imagine. And what if those thin spots weren't just gateways of the past, but windows to something far more dangerous? As the investigators struggled to escape, the whispers grew louder, almost rhythmic, as if they were being summoned by some unseen force. The air around them thickened, each breath becoming more labored, as though the building itself was squeezing the life out of them. But it wasn't just the physical pressure that made their hearts race. It was the overwhelming sense that something was approaching them, something far older and far more powerful than any ghost they had ever encountered. They knew they had to get out, but the more they fought to open the door, the more they realized the truth. They weren't just trapped in a building. They were trapped in a moment where time itself seemed to bend and twist, as though they were being pulled into a dimension beyond their comprehension. One investigator, in a desperate attempt to understand what was happening, began to chant, invoking an ancient ritual he had learned in his studies. He thought perhaps he could reverse the energy, close the portal, and free them from whatever force was holding them in place. But as he spoke the words, the building seemed to tremble, like something had heard him. The whispers stopped. The temperature dropped even further, and then they saw it. In the far corner of the room, a dark figure slowly began to take shape. It flickered, like a glitch in reality, moving in jerky, unnatural movements. The figure was not human. Its body was elongated, its face obscured by shadows. And it wasn't just watching them, it was studying them, as if it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the ritual to be invoked. The entity moved closer, its form becoming clearer with each passing second, and in that moment they understood. This thing, this creature, wasn't a spirit, a lost soul, or even a ghost. It was something else entirely, something that existed outside of time and space, a being that had crossed through the veil, using the funeral home as its passage. And now it had come for them. As the entity reached out, one of the investigators screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The last thing they saw before everything went black was the figure's eyes, glowing, burning with a cold, unearthly light. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving only an empty room and a lingering sense of dread. But the story doesn't end there. After the funeral home was abandoned, the rumors never truly ceased. Some say the land, the building, continues to pulse with energy, quiet and still, but ever present. A few brave souls, those who believe they can defy the unknown, have tried to explore the building, to uncover the truth for themselves. One such group of urban explorers, armed with cameras and equipment, ventured into the decaying structure. They knew the dangers, the stories, the warnings, but they were determined to capture proof of what had been happening for decades. And what they found was beyond their worst nightmares. As they entered, the familiar coldness gripped the air, thick and suffocating. The building seemed to breathe around them, each step echoing louder than the last. They made their way down the dark hallways, the floor creaking beneath their feet. At first, there was nothing, just the eerie silence that had come to define the place. But then, one of them saw it, a flickering light at the end of the hallway, and as they moved toward it, the air seemed to grow heavier, pulling them into something they couldn't escape. The light wasn't from any normal source. It shimmered unstable, like something from another world. It seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, drawing them closer. And as they reached the light, they heard it, a voice, not from any living person, but from the very walls themselves. The voice called their names, each of them by name. It whispered things only they would know. When they turned to leave, they found themselves in a different hallway, one they didn't recognize. The walls were covered in old photographs, some of them blurred, others oddly clear, depicting people they didn't know. But in one of the photos, a familiar face stared back at them. It was one of the explorers, but it wasn't taken recently. It was from decades ago, before the building had even been abandoned. And that's when it hit them. They were trapped, not just in the building, but in time itself. They weren't just seeing the past. They were becoming part of it. One by one, they realized that the building wasn't just holding memories. It was collecting them. The people, the moments, the deaths. It was all part of a cycle, an eternal loop where the living could become part of the dead without even knowing it. The last footage recovered from their cameras shows nothing, just static. And then, for a brief moment, a flicker, an image of the explorers, standing in front of the building, looking at the camera. But they weren't the same. Their faces were different. Their eyes were hollow. And then the screen went black. Just a moment before the next story. Have you been sleeping well lately? No strange dreams? No shadows moving just before you open your eyes? Sometimes, the stories we hear at night find their way into the dark corners of our minds. Let's see what this next one leaves behind when the screen goes black. Do you believe death is the end? That when someone disappears, their story is over? I used to believe that too, until I uncovered what really happens in the darkest places, where death isn't the end. It's the beginning of something far more horrifying. And what I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about life and death. In a secluded town, a reality you'd never imagined starts to unfold. People vanish, but not because someone killed them. They're taken, and the worst part is they come back. They're not the same. They're no longer human. And what goes on inside a crematorium? It's just the tip of the iceberg. It's not what you think. And I promise you, you never imagined something this twisted was happening while you slept safely in your bed. Now, let me ask you this. Do you believe souls truly rest in peace? Or is there something far more sinister that keeps them trapped beyond death? Something that forces people to return, but never as they were before? Don't believe me just yet. But what I'm about to show you will shake everything you think you know about the afterlife. And by the end, you'll be asking yourself if any of us are really safe from the fate of only dying. Are you ready to discover the secret no one dares reveal? Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to witness will shatter your understanding of the supernatural in ways you never thought possible. At the edge of the city, hidden away from the public eye, stands a place many try not to think about. A crematorium, a quiet, sterile building where death is handled with precision. No one notices the dark corners or the things that seem to stir in the shadows. But there are things that shouldn't be there, things that can't be explained by science or reason. And in this crematorium, they've started to reveal themselves. Steve had worked there for years, and death had long become a routine for him. But it wasn't until one fateful night that he noticed something he couldn't forget. Alone on his late-night shift, he walked past the cremation chamber, about to check on the furnace, when he froze. The door to the crematorium was slightly ajar, not open wide, just enough for someone to slip through unnoticed. He couldn't remember leaving it like that. With a cautious step, he approached. But as he did, a faint, unsettling whisper brushed against his ear. It wasn't words, but something that made his skin crawl. He stepped inside, checking the furnace, but it was off. And yet, the room smelled of burning flesh. The scent lingered, thick and heavy, like something or someone was still burning. Sarah had only been working there for a month, and already she noticed things that unsettled her. One night, while alone in the break room, she overheard the faintest whispering coming from the cremation room. Thinking it was just her nerves, she decided to ignore it, but the whispers grew clearer and more distinct. She could make out her name, Sarah. Her heart raced. She knew she had heard it clearly, and it wasn't her imagination. Her pulse quickened as she approached the cremation room, heart pounding in her chest. But the moment she stepped inside, the whispers stopped. She found nothing. The room was cold, darker than it should have been for that time of night. When she glanced toward the furnace, she saw a shadow, a figure standing just outside the doorway. It was human-shaped, but it wasn't right. The figure didn't move, didn't even breathe. Sarah blinked and it vanished. And then there was Marcus. He had only been working at the crematorium for a month, still trying to adjust to the unusual atmosphere. One night, while performing routine maintenance, he found a dusty, old journal hidden in a storage closet. It was a journal of a former worker, but what stood out was the last entry. The worker wrote about hearing voices from the furnace, seeing glimpses of figures in the reflection of the glass, and feeling something pulling them toward the flames. The journal ended abruptly. There was no conclusion, just a final line. They're still here, watching, waiting. As time went on, the three workers, Steve, Sarah, and Marcus, couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread in the crematorium. They began to piece things together, realizing that they weren't experiencing isolated incidents. Something was drawing them in, something tied to the very flames that consumed the bodies. There were moments when they felt an overwhelming pressure, as if they were being watched by eyes that didn't belong to any living person. But who could have known what was truly going on inside that crematorium? One evening, with their nerves stretched thin, the three decided to confront the source of their fear. Together, they entered the cremation room. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped suddenly. Their breath became visible in the cold air, though it was a warm summer night. The flames flickered, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. And then it happened. The door to the furnace slowly creaked open, as though it was inviting them in. They hesitated, fear gnawing at their insides. They tried to turn away, but something drew them back. They had to know, what could possibly be so wrong with a place like this? They approached the furnace together, their hands trembling. The flames inside seemed to move unnaturally, almost as if they were alive. Then they saw it. The figure that emerged from the furnace wasn't what they expected. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't an angry soul trapped in the flames. It wasn't even human. It was a reflection. The flames had shown them something they couldn't comprehend, something that should never be seen. The shape, the outline, it was them, but it wasn't. They were looking at their own faces, twisted and burned beyond recognition. In that moment, the truth dawned on them. The crematorium didn't just burn bodies. It burned memories. It burned souls. It burned the very essence of who they were. And as long as they worked there, they would never escape it. The flames had claimed them, just like it claimed every soul that passed through the furnace. The three workers never returned to the crematorium. The place was abandoned soon after. But rumors persist. People say the crematorium is still standing. And if you listen closely, you can hear faint whispers coming from the furnace room. Are they the whispers of lost souls? Or is something else waiting? But that's not the only place where death and the supernatural are intertwined. Just a few miles away, there's another location where something even darker lurks in the shadows. A place where the line between life and death blurs completely. The next story comes from a place where the living tend to avoid, An old morgue, long abandoned by authorities but never fully forgotten. And just like in the crematorium, it seems that whatever remains there, it doesn't stay dead for long. Rumors have long circulated about the abandoned morgue just a few miles from the crematorium. Like many places left to decay, it had a history of inexplicable disappearances, and those brave enough to venture near it spoke of strange occurrences. Noises that didn't belong to the living, shadows that moved on their own, and cold spots that froze the air. But no one knew the truth of what had happened inside. Until now. The morgue had been shut down years ago after a series of bizarre incidents, but it wasn't forgotten. The locals had always whispered about what went on behind those thick, decaying walls. Those who worked there before it was closed often spoke of something unnatural in the basement, a place where the cold was more than just temperature, and where the bodies seemed to move on their own. It wasn't until a group of urban explorers decided to spend the night inside that the story truly began to unravel. They had heard the rumors, seen the creepy photos online, but nothing prepared them for what they were about to experience. The team consisted of 4 friends, Amy, Jack, Paul, and Lisa, each one eager to discover the truth behind the dark rumors. They arrived at the morgue just after midnight, the cold air pressing down on them as they pushed open the heavy, rusted doors. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop. The familiar chill of death hung heavy in the air, and yet there was something more, something wrong. As they walked through the long, narrow halls, their flashlights flickered erratically. It wasn't just a lack of electricity. It was as if the light itself was unwilling to remain in the darkness of the building. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of the old structure. But then they heard it, the faintest whisper. At first, they thought it was just the wind or their own nerves getting the better of them. But the whispers became clearer, closer. They turned their heads sharply but saw nothing. It wasn't until they reached the basement door that they truly understood what they were up against. The basement door was locked, but with little effort, Paul managed to force it open. As they descended the stairs, a cold draft swept past them. The scent of decay was stronger here, mixed with the unmistakable odor of something more alive. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was like the air itself was thick with secrets, begging to remain hidden. In the basement, the walls were lined with old metal drawers, some left open, some shut tightly, as if they had been disturbed recently. They approached one of the open drawers, and what they saw made their blood run cold. A body lay inside, but it wasn't what they expected. The body had been moved. It was positioned strangely, its arms raised above its head, as if trying to break free from the confines of the drawer. The skin was pale, but there was something else, something that shouldn't be there. The face was familiar. Amy stepped back in horror. This can't be real, she whispered. That face, it looks like my mother. The others froze. They knew Amy's mother had passed away years ago, under mysterious circumstances. They had all been at her funeral, watching her body lowered into the ground. But here in this morgue, her face stared back at them, twisted and cold. As they tried to comprehend the impossible sight before them, they heard a noise, scraping, faint at first, but then louder. It was coming from the drawers. Amy's eyes widened in terror as the body in the drawer began to move, its fingers twitching as if trying to free itself. The air became thick with the unmistakable sense of something alive in the morgue. Panicked, they rushed to leave the basement, but as they ran up the stairs, they realized that something was blocking their exit. The door at the top of the stairs was now completely shut, the doorknob turning by itself. From the other side of the door, they heard a voice, a voice that didn't belong to any living person. It was low and guttural, and it spoke in a language none of them recognized. Lisa, shaking, tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder. The scraping sounds from the basement intensified. And then the sound of something large dragging itself across the floor, coming closer. In that moment, the truth of what happened in the morgue became undeniable. This was no ordinary building. It wasn't just abandoned. It had been left for a reason. The bodies weren't just corpses. They had been awakened. Something had crossed into the living world through the morgue. And whatever it wasn't going to let them leave without a price. Just as the door began to open on its own, the group stumbled backward in terror. They knew, deep down, they weren't alone anymore. And as the darkness of the basement loomed over them, they understood the truth. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. To this day, no one knows what happened to Amy, Jack, Paul, or Lisa. The morgue remained sealed, the building's history erased, as if someone or something wanted to ensure no one would ever know the full story. But there are still those who claim to hear the whispers from the basement late at night, and others say that on rare occasions, you can see shadows moving the windows of the abandoned building. The world is full of mysteries that defy explanation. Stories of places where the dead walk, where the living vanish without a trace, and where the boundaries between life and death become blurred. But there is one place, isolated, far from the prying eyes of society, that has remained hidden for years. A place where the lines between the living and the dead no longer exist, and where the missing are brought back, changed. The town of Black Hollow had always been a quiet, forgotten place. Tucked away deep in the forest, no one seemed to know much about it. Those who lived there rarely ventured out, and outsiders were few and far between. But something was happening there, something no one could explain. It started with the disappearances. People would simply vanish, one after another, without warning. At first, it was thought to be the work of a serial killer, but no bodies were ever found. The police never investigated too deeply, as there was little evidence to go on. And then, after weeks or even months, those who disappeared would return. But they were never the same. It began with Emily Harris, a young woman from Black Hollow, who went missing one cold October night. Her parents were devastated, as were her friends. But after 2 months of silence, Emily came back. She walked right into her family home, her eyes vacant, her expression distant, as if she had forgotten everything about the world she once knew. Her family thought she was just traumatized, maybe from some terrible experience, but it was more than that. Emily's return was unnatural. She never spoke of where she had been or what had happened to her. She simply sat in the corner of her room, staring out the window, her eyes dark as though she was watching something no one else could see. Soon, other missing townspeople began to return. Jack, a local mechanic, Susan, a schoolteacher, even the mayor, who had vanished just days before Emily. They all came back, but something had changed. They weren't the same people who had left. They didn't remember much of their time away, and when they did speak, their voices carried an unsettling tone, like they were speaking on behalf of someone or something else. And then, one evening, a stranger arrived in Black Hollow, an outsider, someone who had heard the stories from nearby towns and wanted to see for himself. His name was Ben, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind the strange happenings in the town. But as soon as he arrived, he could feel it. The air was thick with something unspoken, something old lurking beneath the surface. Ben made his way to the local tavern, where the townspeople gathered. The place was dimly lit, the floor creaking beneath his feet as he walked in. The locals were there, talking in hushed voices. But when they saw him, the conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes turned toward him, cold and unreadable. It was then that Ben noticed them, the ones who had returned. Emily, Jack, Susan, and the others were sitting at the back of the room, staring at it with eyes that seemed to peer through him. He felt a chill crawl down his spine, and for the first time in his life, he understood the true meaning of fear. Ben asked about the disappearances, about the strange behavior of the returned, but no one answered. Instead, Emily stood up slowly, her gaze locked on him. Her lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile as she spoke in a voice that wasn't entirely hers. "You shouldn't have come here. There's no escaping it now." Ben tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if the town itself had sealed him in. Panic set in as he realized the truth. Black Hollow wasn't a town like any other. It was a place where the dead didn't stay dead, and the living were bound by forces beyond their understanding. And those who vanished, they didn't return by choice. They came back because they were taken, chains altered, and bound to a dark, ancient power that could not be broken. Desperate to escape, Ben ran to the outskirts of town. But as he crossed the boundary, something in the woods stopped him. He heard it before he saw it, an eerie, rhythmic sound like chanting coming from deep within the forest. It was then that he realized a horrible truth. The town wasn't just haunted by the dead. It was a place where the veil between worlds had been torn open, and whatever force had taken hold of Black Hollow was calling to him. It was too late. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of the town now, just like the others. The next morning, the townspeople were gone. No one knew where they went, but the signs were clear. The woods had claimed another soul. Ben was now one of them, lost in the folds of time, a part of a world that no one could ever fully understand. And so, Black Hollow remains a cursed place, hidden from the rest of the world. Those who venture too close are never seen again, and the ones who return are never the same. Some say the town is alive, feeding off the souls of those who wander too far, while others believe that the veil between life and death is thin there, and that whatever crosses it can never truly leave. If you listen closely on the wind, you might hear the faint whispers of those who have gone missing. And if you ever find yourself in the woods near Black Hollow, you might just feel the pull of something ancient waiting to claim you. Before the next one begins, can I ask you something simple? When you walk into a room, do you ever feel like something was just there and left, like the air is holding its breath? Some people say that's instinct. Others say it's a warning. Let's see which one fits better after this next story. The oppressive silence, the lingering smell of ashes, and the constant presence of death make it a job that few can endure for long. But for those who stay, there's something even more unsettling than dealing with the dead. What happens when the flames go out? I was never the type to believe in the supernatural. When I landed a job at a small-town crematory, I thought it would be a lonely but uneventful job, just following protocols, turning on the furnaces and making sure everything was clean at the end of the shift. But I soon realized something was wrong with that place. During my first week, I noticed small details I couldn't explain. Tools I was sure I had left in one place would appear somewhere else. The cremation furnace doors would open on their own, even though they were locked. But what truly disturbed me was what I heard one silent night, coming from inside an unused furnace. A faint clicking sound, followed by something that almost sounded like a whisper. I froze, trying to make sense of it. I opened the furnace door, expecting to find some kind of mechanical issue, but everything was in order. The scent of burning still clung to the hot metal. And for a brief moment, I felt something cold brush against my hand. The next day, I mentioned it to a more experienced colleague. He just laughed and told me that every long-time employee had their own stories about what happened there. Fire purifies the body, but it doesn't always take everything with it, he said, offering no further explanation. Over time, I began to notice that certain bodies came with something different. Some, even after the cremation process, left behind darker, almost oily ashes. Others seemed to cause unexplained malfunctions in the equipment. But the worst experience happened on a winter night when I was assigned a solo shift. The last body of the night was an elderly man who, according to the documents, had no family. His pale face seemed to hold an empty stare, even in death. I placed the casket in the furnace and started the cremation, but instead of the usual sound of flames consuming wood and flesh, I heard something that froze me to my core. A knock. At first weak, then stronger. It was as if something inside the furnace was trying to get out. My heart pounded. I knew it wasn't possible. The process had already started, but the knocking continued, now accompanied by a muffled scream. I told myself it was just the wood cracking, the heat warping the coffin structure. But then, the voice became clear. Someone was calling for help. I stepped back, shaking. My instincts screamed for me to shut everything down, open the door, and check. But my mind told me it was impossible. No one could be alive in there. Then, just as my hand reached for the emergency stop button, the sound stopped. Complete silence. The furnace finished its cycle without further interruptions. But when I opened the door to collect the ashes, I felt a presence behind me. I saw nothing, but the air around me grew dense, heavy. A cold whisper brushed against my ear, though I couldn't make out the words. The next morning, as I cleaned up the remains, I found something that should have never been there. Among the ashes, there was a handprint, a hand burned into the metal, as if someone had tried to escape from inside the furnace. I stood there, staring at the handprint burned into the metal, my stomach twisting. It was impossible. The furnace reached such extreme temperatures that nothing should have remained but ashes. But the mark was there, unmistakable. 5 fingers stretched out, as if someone had pressed their hand against the scorching surface. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some strange residue, a flaw in the metal. But the longer I looked, the more I felt something was wrong. The air around me seemed to hum slightly, as if an invisible presence was waiting for me to do something. I took a deep breath and finished cleaning as quickly as possible. But that night, as I tried to sleep, I felt a weight on my chest, like someone was sitting on me, preventing me from breathing. My room was dark, but I had the overwhelming sensation that I was not alone. In the corner of the room, a shadowy figure began to take shape. It had no face, no distinct body, but I knew it was watching me. I shut my eyes, trying to ignore it, but the pressure on my chest grew heavier. Then, I heard a whisper near my ear, a raspy voice, barely recognizable, but with a clear message. "Why didn't you take me out?" My eyes flew open instantly. My body was paralyzed, pinned by the invisible weight. The shadow in the corner of the room seemed to move, slowly approaching me. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but I was completely frozen. It wasn't until the first rays of sunlight pierced through the window that everything vanished. The weight lifted, the shadow dissolved, and I could finally move again. I jumped out of bed, drenched in cold sweat. That morning, I decided I would never return to the crematory. I gathered my things and called my supervisor, making up some excuse to quit. But before leaving town for good, I was overcome by a strange impulse. I needed to see that handprint one last time. I went back to the crematory in the middle of the night. The building was locked, but I managed to get inside unnoticed. Holding my breath, I walked toward the furnace, expecting to find the same mark on the metal surface. But it was gone. The metal was completely smooth, with no trace of what I had seen before. I ran my fingers over the cold surface, trying to understand. Then, in the absolute silence of the crematory, I heard a sound coming from the storage area. The sound of a coffin lid being opened. My heart pounded. The sound echoed through the empty crematory, making the air around me feel heavier. I froze in place, my ears straining for any other noise. But silence returned. The only sound now was my own breathing, short and unsteady. My mind searched for a logical explanation. Maybe it was just the natural shifting of the wooden coffins stacked in the storage area. Maybe a rat or the building settling. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Every step I took toward the storage room seemed to echo louder than it should. The narrow hallway felt longer than I remembered, and the dim sensor lights flickered as if something was interfering with them. When I finally reached the door, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn back, to forget any of this was happening. But the other part, the one already in too deep, needed to see. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was cold, far colder than the rest of the building. The scent of wood chemicals and something faintly metallic filled my nose. Sealed coffins were lined up in neat rows, waiting for their final moment in the furnace. But one of them was open. A shiver ran down my spine. The lid wasn't just ajar. It had been pushed aside, as if something inside had forced its way out. My instincts screamed for me to turn around, to leave and never look back. But my feet kept moving forward. The open coffin sat at an odd angle. The lid, lying beside it, still rocked slightly, as if it had been disturbed just moments ago. I gripped the small flashlight in my coat pocket and aimed it inside. It was empty, but the velvet lining inside wasn't smooth like the others. There were marks, scratches, deep grooves where nails had dug into the fabric, as if someone had fought desperately to get out. My stomach churned. This didn't make sense. No coffin arrived here with a living body. I knew the procedures. Everything went through inspections. What I was seeing should not be possible. And then I felt it, a shift in the air, the same suffocating weight I had felt in my room the night before. The temperature dropped drastically, and a strange odor filled the space. It wasn't just the usual scent of wood, ashes, and chemicals. It was something rancid, like burnt flesh mixed with decay. Then I heard it, a slow, dragging sound, something scraping against the tiled floor. My flashlight shook in my hand, the beam flickering as I aimed it toward the dark corners of the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. And then, in the absolute silence of the crematory, a weak voice whispered my name. It shouldn't have been possible, but it was real. I whipped the flashlight around frantically, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing, just the long shadows of the coffins and the darkness creeping in closer by the second. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Then I noticed it. The coffin lid, which had been lying on the floor moments ago, had shifted. It was closer now, as if something or someone was trying to close it again. My heart nearly stopped as I felt a cold breath against the back of my neck. And then with a sharp snap, the storage room door slammed shut on its own. The loud bang of the door slamming shut echoed through the narrow room, sending a shiver down my entire body. The air felt heavier, thick with something unseen but undeniably there. My chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths as my eyes darted across every corner of the room, desperately searching for a rational explanation. But logic no longer had a place here. The coffin lid moved again, a low, slow creak, like something on the other side was trying to shut it completely. I stepped back, but something inside me screamed that if I let the lid close, something far worse would happen. Forcing myself to move forward, I gripped the flashlight in my trembling hands. With the other hand, I grabbed the coffin lid and pulled it back, opening it completely. The weight in the air deepened, and an icy chill spread through the room. That's when I saw it. On the coffin's velvet lining, where before there had only been scratch marks, there was now something else. Letters, a phrase, hastily scribbled into the worn fabric. The words were jagged, distorted, as if they had been etched by desperate hands. But they were clear enough to read. Don't let him take me. My blood ran cold. I stumbled away from the coffin, my eyes wide, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who had written that? And more importantly, who was him? Before I could react, I felt it. A sudden tug on the back of my shirt, like invisible fingers clenching around the fabric, holding me in place. The suffocating weight in the air intensified, and the strange smell became unbearable. Rancid, burnt, rotting. My flashlight started to flicker, and then I saw it. In the darkness of the farthest corner, something moved. It wasn't a normal shadow. It wasn't the reflection of any object. It was a form that seemed to swallow what little light remained, like a walking void. Tall, gaunt, with no distinct features, but an overwhelming presence. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't move. The figure stood there for a moment, watching me, studying me. Then my flashlight cut out completely, and the world went black. In the next instant, I felt a crushing pressure on my chest, like something was pulling me down. My mind screamed, struggling to stay conscious, but it was as if something was draining me. Then, suddenly, a sound shattered the darkness. The crematory's front doorbell rang. The pressure vanished instantly. My flashlight flickered back to life. Without thinking, I spun around and ran, sprinting towards the door without daring to look back. My heart pounded violently as I reached the main hallway. The building looked exactly the same, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't my imagination. I knew what I had felt. I knew what I had seen. I burst out of the crematory, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I never went back. Days later, I heard someone else had taken my old position. He lasted only a week before quitting without explanation. Some say he heard strange things. Others say he saw something. But one thing is certain. In that crematory, fire may consume the bodies, but it doesn't always take everything with it. Before we move on, I'm curious. Have any of the lights in your house flickered tonight? Did your phone screen dim for a second or act like it caught some movement behind you? It's probably nothing. But this next story tends to wake up things that prefer to stay hidden. Do you believe in ghosts? Or do you think it's all just a trick of the mind? Well, you're about to change your mind. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that challenges everything you thought you knew about the supernatural, and maybe even about yourself. And if you got the guts, stay till the end, because I'm about to reveal something no one has dared to tell about funeral car drivers. That's right. You're about to discover what happens when a funeral driver carries more than just a body. Because here's the first uncomfortable truth. Not all the dead rest in peace. Now, picture yourself in the shoes of one of those drivers, alone on the road late at night, with a body in the back, and something else. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that will follow you to the end, no matter what you do. Think this is just a story? Trust me. You're about to realize that the impossible is far more real than you think. And there's more. Did you know that many funeral drivers report events so terrifying, they'd rather be called crazy than admit what they really saw? This isn't just any horror tale. This is a story of a presence that cannot be ignored. Something that will disturb your perception of what's real and what's just a coincidence. Stay with me. Because by the end of this journey, you'll be asking yourself, what if I'm being followed right now while I'm listening to this? Get ready. What you're about to hear is so bizarre, it'll leave you speechless. Still unsure? Watch till the end. Because after you hear what's coming next, you'll see the world around you in a whole new light. And you want to know more. Grim tales from funeral car drivers. The night is always quiet when you drive a hearse. At least, that's what they say. But for me, that quiet has been broken more times than I can count. I've been a funeral car driver for over 20 years, and I've seen things that make your skin crawl. Tonight, I want to share a few of those stories with you. They're the kind of tales that keep you up at night, questioning whether what you saw was real or just your mind playing tricks on you. But trust me, it was a dark, foggy evening, much like any other. I was driving down a long, empty road just outside of town, the headlights slicing through the dense mist. The body in the back, an elderly man who had passed away from natural causes, was covered with a white sheet, as it should be. I had made the same trip hundreds of times before, but tonight, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I glanced into the rearview mirror, as I often did when the hairs started rising. But instead of seeing the reflection in the back of the hearse, I saw something else. A shadow, a figure, standing in the mist. It wasn't just any figure. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned black dress, her face obscured by a veil. Her presence was unnerving, as though she were waiting for something or someone. My heart raced as I blinked, and in that split second, she was gone. Just a figment of my imagination, I told myself. But as I drove on, the silence fell heavier, the air thick with an unsettling energy. I thought about pulling over to collect myself, but the road ahead was too empty. There were no houses, no streetlights, just endless blackness on both sides. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping. At first, I thought it was the wind or a branch brushing against a car. But no, it was rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the back of the hearse. It sounded as if someone was knocking. But how could that be? The man was dead, his body in the back, and no one else was with me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. But all I could hear was a knock, louder now, coming from the coffin. I slammed on the brakes. pulling the car to a stop in the middle of the road. My breath quickened as I slowly turned around, half expecting to see the old man sitting up, alive and breathing. But no, the body was still there, lifeless. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I sat there for a long moment, too terrified to move. Was it just a trick of my mind, or was something else going on? I didn't know what to do. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Slowly, I began to drive again, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. The silence in the car was suffocating. But then, just as I was about to let out a nervous laugh at myself for being so paranoid, the radio crackled to life. "You're not alone," a distorted voice whispered through the static. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even clear enough to recognize the language. It was just a series of fragmented sounds, like a broken record. But the message was undeniable. "You're not alone." My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for the dial to turn off. But as I did, the voice grew louder, more frantic. "You're not alone." It repeated over and over, each time more urgent than the last. I couldn't breathe. What was happening? Was it the radio malfunctioning? Or was this something else? I pulled over once again, my mind racing, my body trembling. I slammed the off button, cutting the noise abruptly. But then silence. Total silence. Not even the hum of the engine. It was as though the world had frozen. Holding its breath, I sat there in the dark, staring out into the fog, unsure what to do next. My instincts told me to leave the car, to get away from whatever this was, but something deep inside kept me rooted to my seat. And then I heard it, the faintest sound of breathing. It wasn't mine, it wasn't human, and it wasn't coming from the air outside. It was coming from the back of the hearse. I slowly turned my head, my eyes locking on the rear-view mirror, and for the first time that night, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. The reflection in the mirror wasn't the empty back of the hearse anymore. The figure of the woman from earlier, the one in the black dress, was standing there. Her face was now visible. It wasn't the face of an old woman, as I had assumed. It was young, pale, and covered in a grotesque smile that stretched far too wide to be human. Her eyes were black, hollow, like deep voids, and they seemed to stare right into my soul. The breath I had been holding escaped in a shaky gasp. I tried to reach for the door handle, to get out, to run, but my body refused to move. I was frozen, my gaze locked with hers, unable to look away. "You were supposed to take me home," she whispered, her voice like the wind howling through a graveyard. "You were supposed to take me home, and you didn't." I didn't understand. What was she talking about? I had never seen her before. But as her words sank in, something clicked in my mind. A memory from long ago. A woman, a driver, a crash, a wrong turn, a life lost, a promise broken. And just like that, I realized that I had seen this woman before. But she had died years ago. She was supposed to be buried, but somehow she was here with me, following me, waiting. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong everything felt. There was no way this woman, this ghost, whatever she was, could be here. She was supposed to be dead. But then why was she haunting me? Why was she demanding to be taken home? The air inside the hearse felt thick, suffocating. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. But as I tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, my palms slick with sweat, but the door remained locked, as though something invisible was holding it shut. The woman in the mirror, the one with the twisted smile, began to move, her reflection no longer static. She was stepping forward, her feet floating inches above the floor. Her pale fingers reached out toward me, and I could hear her whispering, repeating those same haunting words. "You were supposed to take me home." I turned around in a panic, tried to look at the back of the hearse, but nothing. The coffin was still there, silent. No movement, no sign of anything unusual. Was I losing my mind? Was I imagining this? But then, as I glanced back into the mirror, I saw it. The woman was standing behind me, right there in the hearse, inches from my face. Her cold breath brushed against my neck as she leaned in, whispering in my ear with a voice that chilled me to the bone. "Take me home, or they'll take you instead." I jumped, my body instinctively recoiling. The mirror, my only point of reference, showed nothing but the empty back of the car. But I could feel her. I could feel her presence. Just behind me, her eyes burning into my skin. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I had to get away from her, from whatever curse I had unknowingly walked into. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding down the dark road, not even knowing where I was headed. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see a few feet ahead. The road twisted and turned like a labyrinth, and the deeper I drove, the more disoriented I became. The feeling of being followed, the sensation of being watched, grew stronger with every mile, no matter how fast I went. It was as if she was right there behind me, waiting. Suddenly, the headlights flickered, and then the car died. The engine sputtered, the lights went out, and I was left in complete darkness. The silence was deafening, but the faint sound of breathing filled the air again, this time coming from all around me. I reached for my phone, but it had no signal, no service. I was completely alone, or so I thought, and then I heard it, a soft, low laugh, a laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned around slowly, and there she was again, the woman. She was no longer just a reflection. She was real, standing in front of me. Her smile even wider now, her eyes black and empty. I couldn't escape. There was nowhere left to run. "I told you," she said, her voice cold as ice. "You were supposed to take me home. And now, you'll stay with me forever." I couldn't move. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of that car, but my body betrayed me. I was paralyzed, frozen in place by the horror of what was happening. The woman stepped closer, her presence overwhelming, filling the car with a suffocating coldness. I could feel her breath on my face, icy and foul, as if death itself had taken form. "You didn't listen," she whispered, her voice now a low, guttural growl. "You should have taken me home, and now you will pay the price." Her smile grew wider, stretching impossibly, as if her face could no longer contain the twisted grin. Her eyes, those deep black voids, stared into mine, and I saw flashes of the life I didn't know, of a woman who had been wronged, who had suffered, and who was now demanding her justice. Her anger radiated through the car, making the air thick and oppressive. "You don't belong here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You're dead. You're just a ghost. This isn't real." But the woman didn't respond. Instead, she began to fade, her form flickering like a broken film reel. For a moment, I thought she was gone, that it was over. But then, the car shook violently. The windows rattled, the entire hearse swaying as if caught in a violent storm. The fog outside thickened, and the world outside seemed to close in on me. I heard the sound of something dragging along the roof of the car, My eyes darted to the rear-view mirror once more, and that's when I saw it. Her hand was pressed against the window, her fingers splayed wide, her face just inches away from the glass. "You're not leaving," she whispered, her voice low and raspy. "Not until I'm home." The door, which had been locked just moments before, flew open with a deafening crash. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the car, running blindly into the mist, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get away. I had to outrun whatever this was. But as I ran, the fog swallowed me whole. I couldn't see, couldn't hear anything except my own frantic breathing. I turned back for a moment, hoping to see the hearse, to make sure it was still there, but all I saw was darkness. The fog had swallowed it whole. The woman was gone. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, but as I continued to run, something caught my eye. In the distance, a shadow, familiar, too familiar, loomed in the fog. A hearse, my hearse, the same one I had been driving just moments ago. The headlights flickered to life, casting an eerie glow in the mist, and there, sitting in the driver's seat, was the woman. Her smile was waiting for me, wide and unyielding. I froze in place, staring at her, and that's when I heard the whisper again. "You were supposed to take me home." I couldn't breathe. My body froze, caught in that moment of pure terror. The figure in the hearse, her smile still grotesque, stared at me, her hollow eyes never leaving mine. It was as if time had stopped, and all I could do was stand there, paralyzed, while the fog swirled around me like a living thing. The hearse's engine roared to life, its headlights cutting through the thick mist, illuminating the eerie glow of the woman sitting in the driver's seat. But this time, something was different. Her smile wasn't the same twisted grin I had seen earlier. It had turned into something far more sinister, more knowing. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was victorious. "You can't escape," she whispered, her voice low, almost triumphant. "You thought you could outrun me, but you made a mistake the moment you decided to drive me. Now you belong to me." I turned and ran again, but this time my legs didn't move the way I wanted them to. The fog was thick, suffocating, and each step felt heavier than the last. It was like the ground itself was pulling me down, as though the earth didn't want me to leave. I stumbled, trying to find my bearings, but everything around me was shifting, warping, as if reality itself was bending to her will. I didn't know how long I had been running. Time didn't make sense anymore. It felt like hours, or maybe days, had passed. But then I saw something in the distance. A streetlight flickered, casting a faint glow on a small, run-down house. It was the first sign of life I had seen in what felt like forever. With renewed desperation, I sprinted toward it, hoping, praying, that someone would be there, that I could find safety. As I reached the house, I pounded on the door, my knuckles raw from the frantic knocking. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dark, empty room. There was no one there. The silence was oppressive, almost suffocating. But then, just as I was about to turn around and run again, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing. The woman, the ghost, she was gone. Or so I thought. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the doorway, her face obscured by a veil. It was her, the same woman. She had followed me here, and now I knew she wasn't going to let me go. "You can't run from the past," she whispered, her voice like ice. "You can't outrun your sins." I didn't know what she meant, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it was far from over. She wasn't just a ghost. She was something far worse. something that followed me from my past, from a mistake I had made long ago. And now, she was taking me with her. I couldn't move. I could feel her presence, like a cold hand gripping my heart, squeezing the life out of me. The woman in the doorway stepped forward, her steps slow and deliberate, each one echoing in the silence. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body betrayed me. I was trapped in the fog, trapped in her world, and there was no way out. "You thought you could escape," she whispered, her voice sending chills down my spine. "But there's no escaping what you've done, no escaping what you are." I didn't understand. What had I done? What was she talking about? I had never seen her before, never even heard her name, but she knew me. She knew something about me, something dark that I hadn't remembered until now, something that made the air around me thick with dread. "It's too late," she said, her voice now almost soothing, like a lullaby, but twisted with malice. "You've already made your choice, and now you'll be with me forever. There's no running from it." The fog around us thickened and the house began to fade, its walls dissolving into mist, until it was just the two of us, standing in an endless void. I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but the screen was cracked and the signal was dead. I could feel my pulse racing, my breath quickening. My mind was screaming at me to wake up, to snap out of whatever nightmare this was, but it felt so real. And then, for the first time, I realized something. There was no way back. I wasn't just stuck in this moment. I was stuck in time itself. The past, the present, and the future all tangled together. The road I had driven, the decisions I'd made, they all led me here, to this point where I couldn't escape. "You'll never leave," she said, her voice now full of dark satisfaction. "You're mine now, and the others, they'll be coming for you soon." Her words echoed in the void, a promise of something worse. I turned away from her, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of everything. But there was nothing to grasp. No answers. Only the endless fog and her cold, mocking voice. I was no longer sure if this was a dream or if I had truly lost my mind. But one thing was certain, I was trapped. And no matter how hard I tried to run, there was no escape. Before we continue, just a thought. Have you ever noticed how some rooms feel different at night than they do during the day? Like the walls are listening, or the shadows are waiting for something. Maybe it's your mind playing tricks. Or maybe this next story will explain why. We begin with a migrant arriving in a small, isolated village after a long and difficult journey. This character, let's call him Alejandro, is looking for a better life, far away from the hardships he faced back home. The village appears peaceful at first glance, nestled between hills, with quaint houses and sparse traffic. But there's something off about the place. The locals don't seem to speak much, and their faces are hidden behind veils of indifference. Alejandro feels an unsettling chill as soon as he steps off the bus, though he dismisses it as a result of his exhaustion. As night falls, the silence becomes even more oppressive. The streets grow emptier, and the few people out at this hour keep their heads down, not making eye contact. Alejandro tries to rest in the small inn where he's staying, but sleep evades him. The air feels thick, as if the world outside is holding its breath. Little does he know, this village harbors a terrifying secret that no outsider is meant to uncover. Later that night, Alejandro is unable to shake the feeling that he's being watched. The quiet of the village is unnerving. It's as though the night itself has a presence, an energy that he can't explain. He gets out of bed, thinking a walk might help clear his mind, but as he steps outside, the cold air grips him. The streets are completely deserted now, save for the faint sounds of distant footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. Alejandro pauses, looking around, but there's no one in sight. He hesitates for a moment, then begins walking down a narrow alley. Suddenly, he hears a rustle in the shadows, a figure moving quickly in the distance. Alejandro freezes. His heart races, and he feels an inexplicable pull to follow. Despite every instinct telling him to turn back, he steps forward, the sound of his footsteps now muffled in the eerie silence. As he rounds a corner, the figure disappears, but Alejandro is sure he saw someone, a tall, shadowy figure with an unsettling presence. He calls out, but the alley remains still. The air feels thick, almost oppressive, as if the entire village is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. His mind starts to race, and he wonders if exhaustion is playing tricks on him, but deep down, he knows something is wrong. This isn't just a normal village. Something strange is at play here, something that's been hidden from him since his arrival. He feels an unshakable sense of dread creep over him, as if he's being lured deeper into a mystery he won't be able to escape from. The next day, Alejandro tries to shake off the strange feeling from last night, but he can't. He tries to go about his day, seeking work in the village and speaking to a few locals, but no one seems eager to engage. He notices the same blank, distant expressions on the faces of the villagers, and when he speaks, his words seem to fade into the air like whispers. That evening, as he sits alone in a small cafe, he overhears a conversation between a couple of migrants who appear to be in a similar situation, out of place and looking for a way to move forward. Alejandro, curious, approaches them. The man introduces himself as Carlos and the woman as Sofia. Both are refugees, though from different countries, and they too arrived in the village with the hope of finding a new start. As they chat, Alejandro learns that Carlos and Sofia have been in the village for weeks, but neither of them can seem to find a way out. When Alejandro asks about the village, Sofia's eyes shift nervously. She lowers her voice, as if afraid of being heard. "There's something about this place," she whispers. "I don't know what it is, but there's no way out." Carlos nods gravely and adds, "No matter where we go, we always end up back here. It's like the village pulls us back, like it's trapping us." Alejandro is skeptical at first, thinking they might be overreacting, but as the conversation unfolds, he hears more disturbing accounts from them. Stories of other migrants who had tried to leave, only to find themselves back in the village, as if they had never left at all. Sofia's voice trembles as she tells Alejandro about the trail of migration, a strange path that seems to lead all migrants to this village, and once they're here, they can't leave. It's like they're stuck in some kind of loop, and no one knows why. But the worst part, they say, is that the longer you stay, the more you become a part of the village itself. And when you're fully absorbed, you disappear. Alejandro feels a knot form in his stomach. Could this be why he's been drawn here? The more he listens, the more unsettling it all feels. The strange figure he saw the night before now takes on new meaning. It wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was a sign, a warning. As Alejandro continues to stay in the village, the strange occurrences multiply. Every morning, he wakes up with a heavy sense of dread, as if something ominous is about to happen. The village itself seems to shift around him. Buildings that once appeared familiar now look different, as if they've subtly changed overnight. Streets that were once easily navigable now seem to twist into unfamiliar paths, leading him in circles. The feeling of being trapped becomes more pronounced. One afternoon, Alejandro decides to take matters into his own hands. He must escape, determined. He plans his exit route. He'll walk through the woods at the edge of the village, hoping it will lead him out. The path is difficult, tangled with thick branches and the dense shadows of the forest. But he presses on. Hours pass, and just when he thinks he's made progress, he stumbles upon a clearing. The sun is beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. But when Alejandro looks around, something feels off. He's been here before. The same clearing, the same tall trees, the same scent of pine. He spins around, confused and breathless, but there's no sign of the path he came from, only the same haunting stillness. Panic begins to creep in as he realizes that he's back where he started. His heart pounds in his chest and a cold sweat breaks out on his brow. How could this be? The woods had seemed endless, but now they appear to be a maze, trapping him inside. Suddenly, he hears a faint whisper, a voice carried on the wind, one that sounds far too familiar. It's Sophia's voice calling his name. He turns, desperate to find her, but there's no sign of her. The whispers grow louder, swirling around him in a way that makes him feel dizzy, disoriented. It's as though the forest itself is alive, watching him, pulling him deeper into its heart. Alejandro's breath catches in his throat as he realizes the truth. There is no escape. The village has marked him, just like it marked Carlos, Sophia, and the others. He is a part of the cycle now, a lost soul on the trail of migration, bound to walk these cursed paths forever. And as the sun dips below the horizon, Alejandro feels a cold, invisible hand touch his shoulder. When he turns, no one is there, but the voice continues louder now, as if it's right next to him. You can't leave. As the day turns to night, the atmosphere around Alejandro thickens with an unnatural heaviness. The air is damp and cold, and the shadows of the trees stretch long, as if they're reaching out to him. He tries to calm himself, telling himself that it's all just the result of exhaustion and fear. But as he continues to walk through the woods, his mind races, and the unsettling whispers grow louder, more urgent. Alejandro stumbles, tripping over a hidden root, and falls hard onto the forest floor. The ground beneath him feels unnaturally cold, as though it's been waiting for him. His breath comes in ragged gasps as he pushes himself up, wiping dirt from his hands, only to find that his fingers are covered in something dark and wet, soil mixed with a sticky substance. He looks at it, his heart racing as he realizes that the ground is bleeding. The forest around him seems to pulse with a rhythm of its own, a heartbeat that matches his. The trees groan and creak, their branches twisting unnaturally. For a moment, he wonders if he's losing his mind. But then he hears something, a faint rustling sound, followed by the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. He turns, expecting to see someone, maybe one of the other migrants, but there's nothing, only the same endless expanse of trees. Yet the footsteps continue, echoing in the distance. Alejandro's pulse quickens, and he feels a cold sweat drip down his back as the footsteps grow louder. They're approaching, but from where? Suddenly, a figure steps into the clearing, a tall, shadowy figure that Alejandro recognizes. It's the same figure he saw the first night, the one that disappeared when he tried to follow. But this time, the figure doesn't vanish. It stands there, its face obscured by a hood, its body cloaked in darkness. Alejandro tries to speak, but his voice fails him. The figure doesn't move, doesn't acknowledge him. Instead, it points a long, bony finger at the ground. Alejandro looks down, his eyes wide with terror, and sees what's beneath him. A circle of bones, arranged in a strange pattern. Some of them are still fresh, the flesh almost intact, while others are old and brittle, long forgotten by time. He steps back, his heart hammering in his chest as the realization sinks in. The bones aren't just remnants of the past. They are a warning. The path he's on has claimed others before him, and it will claim him too if he doesn't break the cycle. But it's too late. The moment Alejandro steps backward, the ground beneath him shifts, and the trees seem to close in, blocking his path. The forest has turned against him. He hears the whispers again, louder now, not just from one direction, but from all around him, surrounding him. They speak in voices both familiar and foreign, urging him to stop, to give in. Then, with a chill that runs deep into his bones, Alejandro realizes that he isn't alone. Figures begin to emerge from the darkness. Other migrants, their faces hollow and lifeless, their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. They reach out to him with gaunt hands, their eyes wide open but seeing nothing. They become part of the village, part of the curse that binds all who enter. One by one, they encircle him, and Alejandro feels his strength slipping away. The whispers now feel like a crushing weight on his chest, suffocating him, pulling him into the very soil that surrounds him. His vision fades, and as the world around him darkens, he hears one final, haunting whisper. "You are one of us now." The last thing he sees is the shadowy figure standing above him, its face still hidden, its finger pointing directly at him. And then everything goes black. It's a cold winter night when Emma, a young migrant, finds herself boarding a long-distance bus headed to a city far from her homeland. She's leaving behind everything she knew, hoping for a fresh start. The bus is nearly empty, with only a few passengers scattered throughout, and the interior is dimly lit, adding to the eerie stillness of the journey. As the bus begins to roll down the desolate highway, Emma tries to settle in for the long ride, but something feels off. The few passengers on board avoid eye contact, lost in their own thoughts. But one figure catches her attention. An old man sitting toward the back, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. His presence feels strange, almost out of place. Emma feels the hairs on the back of her neck rise as he remains eerily still, not even moving to adjust his position. As the bus speeds through the night, Emma notices that the outside world begins to feel oddly distant. The road ahead seems endless, the trees outside motionless, as though they've been frozen in time. She glances at the other passengers, but everyone is unusually quiet, and the bus driver doesn't speak a word. There's a sense of isolation, like they're the only people in the world. Then, a strange feeling washes over Emma, like she's being watched. She turns to look out the window, but the reflection of her face in the glass seems distorted, blurry. She rubs her eyes and tries to focus, but when she looks back up, she notices something even more unsettling. The figure of the old man is no longer in his seat. She scans the bus frantically, but there's no sign of him. It's as if he vanished into thin air. Suddenly, she hears a faint whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, coming from the front of the bus. It's a voice, but it doesn't sound like anyone on board. The whispering grows louder, though she can't make out the words. It's a language she doesn't recognize, deep and guttural, like something ancient. Her heart races, and she feels a surge of panic. The bus stops unexpectedly at a small, isolated station in the middle of nowhere. The doors open, but no one moves to get off. The station is abandoned, covered in snow and frozen in time, and there's a chill in the air that feels unnatural. Emma is terrified. She can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. As she sits frozen in her seat, the whispering grows louder, now unmistakable, and she hears footsteps from the back of the bus. When she turns, she sees the old man standing in the aisle, his eyes glowing a faint green, his expression empty and lifeless. He takes a step forward, and the temperature inside the bus drops sharply. "Get off," he whispers. The bus door opens once more, and Emma, her body trembling, realizes that she has no choice but to step into the cold unknown, where danger lurks, and the past may be far darker than she ever imagined. Emma hesitates at the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she stands frozen in the icy air. The old man's glowing eyes are fixed on her, his expression void of any humanity. The bus, despite the freezing cold outside, seems impossibly warm, and she can feel a wave of oppressive heat radiating from it. The rest of the passengers remain motionless, as if they, too, are trapped in some strange, frozen state, unseeing, unfeeling. Her breath forms clouds in front of her face, and she takes a step forward, but just as her foot touches the ground, a strange sound echoes through the empty station. The sound of something moving in the darkness. It's not human. The air becomes thick with the scent of rot and decay, and Emma can feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She glances at the bus driver, who has still not spoken a word, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as if he's afraid to turn. His eyes never leave the road ahead. The old man steps closer, his feet making no sound on the frozen floor. He reaches out a trembling, gnarled hand, and Emma instinctively takes a step back. But it's too late. With a creak of the bus doors, they close behind her. She's standing in front of the desolate station, the wind howling through the abandoned structure, and the only light coming from the faint glow of the bus headlights. The old man speaks again, his voice like ice scraping over metal. "You're already part of the journey." Emma's pulse quickens as she takes in the surroundings. The station is old, covered in a thick layer of snow and ice, the windows cracked, and the ground frozen solid beneath her feet. The road leading away from the station seems endless, a stretch of black pavement that disappears into the night. The sky above is dark, filled with thick clouds and no stars in sight. She feels the weight of being utterly alone, trapped in a place that doesn't exist on any map. Turning around, she's stunned to see that the bus has vanished. The headlights are gone, and there's no sign of the vehicle anywhere. Her mind races. Had it been real? Or was this all part of the strange pull that the village had on her, drawing her into a place where time and reality don't work the way they should? Her feet begin to move on their own, drawn toward the edge of the station, where the pavement starts. She feels a strange compulsion to keep walking, as if the road itself is calling her. But before she can take another step, the whispering starts again. This time it's louder, as if it's coming from every direction. The voices are incomprehensible, speaking in a language that chills her to the bone. It's a sound like the wind itself is alive, moving with purpose, whispering secrets she doesn't want to hear. She turns back, but the station is empty now, completely empty. There's no sign of the bus, no sign of the old man, and no sign of anyone else. Only the silence, the wind, and the growing sense that she's no longer in control. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the darkened road. It's a man, his face obscured by shadows, but his presence is undeniable. He's walking slowly toward her, his steps measured and purposeful. His eyes, glowing faintly, reflect the same unnatural green as the old man's. As he nears, Emma sees that his clothes are torn, as though he's been walking for days, perhaps even longer. "You shouldn't have gotten off," the man says, his voice low and cold. "This place doesn't let you leave once you enter." Emma's breath catches in her throat. She's paralyzed by fear, unable to move or speak. The man steps closer, his gaze piercing into her very soul. "We've all made the same mistake," he whispers, his voice now a chilling growl. "And now, you're one of us." Suddenly, the ground trembles beneath her feet. The road shifts, elongating into an unrecognizable stretch of dark, winding asphalt. The figure before her vanishes, and she's left standing alone in the midst of an endless road, surrounded by the sound of whispers and the feeling that something is watching her. As Emma starts walking again, the whispers grow louder, more insistent, as if trying to guide her, or perhaps warn her. The road ahead seems to stretch on forever, disappearing into the black horizon, and though she walks, she never seems to move forward, always stuck in a loop, trapped in a place where time has no meaning. The road stretches ahead of her, twisting into a darkness so deep it feels like an endless void. Emma's legs grow heavy with each step, as if the pavement itself is trying to pull her down, to slow her progress. The wind howls around her, and the whispers, which had once been faint, now grow unbearably loud, echoing in her ears and drowning out all other sound. They chant in unison, their words becoming clearer with each passing moment. "Lost forever, no escape, one of us." Emma fights to ignore the voice inside her head, the one that tells her she's already trapped. But the more she walks, the more she begins to question herself. Is she even moving? The road seems to shift beneath her feet, its path never the same as it was moments before. She looks behind her, but the station she had just left has disappeared, swallowed by the darkness that now surrounds her. The only thing left is the cold, the whispers, and the creeping sense that something is coming for her. She presses on, her breath shallow, her body trembling in the cold. She's no longer sure of what's real. The longer she walks, the more she feels her grip on reality slipping. She reaches out for something solid to hold on to, but there's nothing. Only the road, which seems to go on forever. And then, from the corner of her eye, she catches a fleeting glimpse of movement. Her heart skips a beat as she spins around. Standing just off the road is a figure, vague at first, then slowly becoming clearer as if it's being pulled from the shadows. It's the old man from the bus, his face still hidden beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His form is almost translucent, as if he's made from the very fog around her. "You thought you could leave," he whispers, his voice like dry leaves scraping across the ground. But no one ever leaves this place, not once they've stepped on the path. Emma feels a cold, Creeping terror rise in her chest. She tries to back away, but her feet refuse to move. She's rooted to the spot, unable to escape his gaze. The whispers intensify, swirling around her in a frenzy of voices, all calling her name, all reminding her of her fate. "You're just like the rest of us," the old man continues, his voice echoing in the stillness. "You've joined the journey, and now you will never find your way back." The ground beneath her trembles again, and the road seems to distort. The edges of the path begin to warp, folding in on themselves, as if the world itself is collapsing inwards. Emma's vision blurs, and for a moment, she feels like she's being pulled in all directions at once, her body floating weightless. But just as quickly, the sensation stops. The road before her clears, and she sees the same old station in the distance, exactly as it was when she first arrived. It's as if no time has passed at all. The bus should be there, but instead, it's replaced by a single figure standing at the edge of the platform. It's the man from before, but now his features are clearer. His eyes glow the same unnatural green, and he's staring at her with a cold, calculating expression. "You never leave," he says softly, "and you never will. This road, it leads nowhere." Emma tries to scream, but no sound comes. She looks around desperately, but the darkness seems to close in on her. The road twisting once more, the station fading into the horizon. The air grows suffocating, thick with dread. Every step she takes feels like it's dragging her deeper into the unknown. Her vision begins to blur again, and the whispers return louder than ever, echoing in her mind until she can no longer distinguish her thoughts from the voices surrounding her. In that moment, Emma realizes the horrifying truth. The road isn't just a path through the woods or a stretch of highway. It's a cycle, a never-ending loop of despair that traps those who venture onto it. She is part of it now, bound to wander forever, lost in a place where time has no meaning. As her surroundings fade, she hears one last whisper before everything slips away. "You are one of us." Before we dive into the next story, just one question. Have you ever paused a video like this and felt like something didn't want you to finish it? Do you feel like someone or something is paying attention to you right now? Don't worry. That feeling tends to get stronger with the next story. Have you ever wondered what really happens when the lights go out in a funeral home? If you believe the dead rest in peace, it's time to rethink everything you thought you knew. What I'm about to tell you will challenge every belief you have about the supernatural. These aren't just ghost stories. They're real, inexplicable experiences that took place in places where death should be the end. But it's not. Imagine stepping into a place where the darkness isn't just from the night, where shadows move and the dead might not be so dead after all. And what if I told you that the very people who work in these places feel the presence of something that shouldn't be there? Here's the kicker that no one tells you. The people who face what you're about to hear often never leave the same. You're about to see how far real fear can go, and why some mysteries can never be fully explained. Now, if you think this is just another ghost story, think again. What happened to these people might be far more real than you can imagine. Are you ready to hear what authorities have kept hidden about what really happens in funeral homes? What happened to Emily, for example? She never walked out of that place, or maybe she never walked out of herself. And what about the things the others never told you? Stick with me until the end, because what you'll uncover will change how you look at life and death. Ready? Let's go. The funeral home, a place where the living bid farewell, and the dead quietly slip into eternity. But not all things in this world stay where they belong. Some things linger, trapped between realms, waiting, watching, calling. It was past midnight when Sarah, alone in the dim-lit halls of the old funeral home, began to feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her. The last family had left, their footsteps echoing as they disappeared into the night. The place was quiet now, too quiet. It was the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts feel louder, like they were the only sound in the world. She made her way through the hall, the sound of her heels tapping on the hardwood floor, the only noise breaking the eerie stillness. She was used to this, used to the solitude of her late shifts. But tonight felt different. Sarah stopped in front of the embalming room. She could hear it again, the whisper. This time it was unmistakable. Help me? The voice was coming from within, but how could it be? There was no one there. She pressed her ear against the door, straining to catch any other sound. But all she heard was the hum of the refrigeration unit and the faint rustling of something like breathing. Was it her mind playing tricks on her? The dark, lonely building, the constant presence of the dead? Or was there something else? Something that shouldn't be here? Something that wasn't ready to rest? As Sarah hesitated, a chill ran down her spine, and the whisper came again, but now it sounded different. It didn't sound like a plea. It sounded more like command. Come closer. Her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't explain it, but something about that voice felt wrong. Like it wasn't just a voice, but a presence. Something watching her, waiting. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, and she turned the doorknob. The door creaked open slowly, the cold air inside rushing out like it had been waiting for her. But when she stepped inside, she felt nothing. The room was just as it had been, empty, cold, and silent. The body of the deceased lay on the table, its pale face illuminated by the dim overhead light. But for a brief moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw the body's eyes move, slowly, very slowly, just enough to make her question her sanity. She blinked, and the eyes were still. She took a step back, heart racing, and that's when she heard the sound, the softest, faintest rustling, like something dragging across the floor. The room was completely still. Was it the body? Was it the wind? Or was something else moving in the shadows? Her breath caught in her throat as the faintest whisper echoed through the room once more. I'm still here. In a panic, Sarah turned to leave, but as she did, she felt the air grow thick, almost as if the room itself was closing in on her. The whispers followed her, growing louder, more frantic. And then, suddenly, the lights flickered, once, twice, before plunging the room into total darkness. Was she imagining it all? Or was something truly alive in this place? A presence that refused to be forgotten, trapped between the world of the living and the dead? Sometimes the mind can play tricks on you. The stress, the isolation, the darkness that fills every corner. But Sarah's experience was different. It wasn't just the shadows that moved in the corners of her vision. It was something else, something she couldn't explain. And as the lights flickered, she wondered, was it just her imagination, or was she truly seeing the dead? Sarah's story was far from the only one. As the whispers faded from the halls of the funeral home, another chilling account was about to unfold in a different part of the country. But this one wasn't from a young, wide-eyed attendant. It came from someone who had seen it all. James had been working as a mortician for over 30 years. His hands had prepared hundreds of bodies, and the smell of formaldehyde had long since lost its sting. He was used to the eerie calm of the funeral home, the late-night shifts, the solitude. But even he wasn't prepared for what happened one fateful evening. It started like any other day. The air was cool. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the funeral home stood in its usual quiet. James had been working alone for a while, getting ready for the next service. It wasn't uncommon for him to be the only one around at night. No one else ever volunteered for night shifts. The silence had always been a comfort to him, a necessary part of his work. That night, though, something was different. James was preparing the body of an elderly man who had passed away earlier that day. The body was cold, stiff, and the usual work proceeded as normal. But as he looked down at the lifeless face, something caught his attention. The man's eyes, they weren't as still as they should have been. James blinked and looked again. No, it couldn't be. The old man's eyes had shifted, just barely. His left eye had moved slightly to the left. A subtle, imperceptible movement, but it was enough to make James freeze. He looked away quickly, tried to convince himself it was just his mind playing tricks on him. After all, the body had been embalmed, the eyes had been closed. There was no way it could move. He took a deep breath, focused on the task at hand, and resumed his work. But the feeling of being watched crept over him, intensifying with every passing second. James had been in the business long enough to know that the dead didn't usually make their presence felt. But as he continued working, he heard something that made his heart skip a beat, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It wasn't coming from anywhere in particular. It was as if the very air around him was speaking. "I'm not finished." The voice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. He could feel his pulse race as the words echoed in his mind. He turned around quickly, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. The room was still, silent. He stood there for a long time, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. The room remained as quiet as ever. He was alone. The whisper had vanished. Yet, the feeling didn't leave. James could still feel the weight of the words pressing on him, almost as if they were a warning. Something was off. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, or so it seemed. James continued his work, finishing up with the body and preparing for the next service. But as he went to leave, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The faint sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. At first, he thought it was just his mind again, the isolation playing tricks on him. But the footsteps grew louder, closer. James turned around quickly, but there was no one there. His heart raced as he stood frozen in place. The footsteps stopped suddenly, just like that. Was it a ghost? Or just his mind breaking under the weight of years of late nights in an empty building? James had been in the mortician business for over 3 decades, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Was it a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or something more? Something darker? Some things linger after death, and sometimes they refuse to stay put. But the question remains, what happens when they're not ready to leave? The shadows in the corners of the funeral home were thick with secrets, but some secrets aren't meant to stay hidden for long. James' experience was only a glimpse into a much darker mystery that lay beneath the surface of this quiet building, and it would soon reveal itself in a way that no one could explain. It wasn't long after James' unsettling encounter that a new attendant, Emily, started her shift. She had been warned about the place, the strange stories, the eerie happenings, but she was a practical woman, not one to believe in ghosts or spirits, or so she thought. Her first night alone in the funeral home was relatively calm. The building was as quiet as any other. save for the hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. She moved through the rooms, preparing for the next day's services. But as midnight struck, the atmosphere changed. The silence became almost oppressive, like the building was holding its breath. Emily was making her way down the long hallway when she felt a sudden chill sweep through the air. It wasn't like the usual cold of the building. It was a biting, unnatural cold, like stepping into a freezer. She paused, looking around, but saw nothing. Just empty rooms, long hallways, and the soft ticking of the clock. But then she noticed something. At the far end of the hall, in the dim light of the corridor, she saw the outline of a figure standing motionless. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps her mind playing games after a long shift. But the figure didn't move. It was tall, unnaturally still, and completely silent. Emily's heart started to race. She couldn't see the face, but she could feel its gaze, intense, heavy, like it was watching her. And then, as if to prove her thoughts wrong, the figure took a slow, deliberate step forward. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, not knowing whether to run or stay. The figure stepped again, and then it was gone. No sound, no footsteps. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Emily blinked, unsure if she'd imagined it. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. But when she turned to leave, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The door to the chapel was wide open. Even though she was certain she'd closed it earlier, she had walked down the hall just moments before and it had been shut tight. Now, the chapel was invitingly dark. Its interior bathed in an eerie, pale glow. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, like something was waiting. With cautious steps, Emily approached the chapel. The floor creaked beneath her feet as she entered, her breath shallow. She scanned the room, but nothing seemed out of place. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the rows of empty chairs. But then she saw it, a figure, sitting at the far end of the chapel. It wasn't a person, though. It was a shadow blacker than the darkness around it, unnaturally still, like a part of the room itself. Emily's heart raced, her feet refusing to move. Was this another illusion, or was something truly there? As she stood frozen, the shadow seemed to grow, stretching across the floor toward her, inch by inch. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't move. The shadow inched closer, until it was just a few feet away, its presence pressing down on her chest. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come." Emily's blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't human. It was deeper, more resonant, like the very walls of the chapel were speaking. Her body refused to obey her commands, and all she could do was stare at the shadow as it loomed closer. What was the shadow in the chapel? Was it something that had always been there, lurking in the dark corners of the funeral home, waiting for the right moment to show itself? Or was it a manifestation of something far darker, a presence tied to the building's troubled past? Emily had no answers, only a lingering feeling of dread that would follow her long after she left that night. And for those who stay in this place, it's always the same. The shadows never stay still. They move, they grow, they wait. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as the shadow closed the distance between them, its form stretching unnaturally across the chapel floor. The whispers, once a faint murmur, now seemed to vibrate through the very walls, as if the building itself were alive. She tried to move, anything, but her legs were frozen, locked in place. Her heart raced, each beat echoing louder than the last, until it felt like her chest might burst. The shadow was so close now, its presence suffocating, pressing down on her like a physical weight. And then, just as the room seemed to close in around her, it spoke again. You shouldn't have come. This place never lets you leave. The voice was low, resonant, like it came from the very bowels of the earth itself. Emily's throat went dry as she struggled to breathe. She felt her body tremble, the sensation of being trapped overwhelming her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. Suddenly, the shadow receded, pulling back as if it had been called away by some unseen force. The oppressive air lifted, and Emily felt herself exhale a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The chapel was silent again. The figure had disappeared, but the unease remained. Emily's legs gave out as she collapsed to the floor, her mind racing. What had just happened? Was it real, or had she simply lost her grip on reality? She scrambled to her feet, looking around one last time to be sure she wasn't imagining it. As she hurried toward the door, she noticed something that chilled her to her core. The photograph on the wall by the exit, the one she'd passed a dozen times before, now showed a different face. It was her face. She stared at it for a moment, unsure what she was seeing. The image in the frame was unmistakable. Her standing in the chapel, exactly where she had been moments ago. Her breath caught in her throat, and she stumbled back, her hand shaking as she reached the door. But when she opened it, the hallway outside wasn't the same. The walls were cracked, the air thick with a strange, musty smell, like something that had been locked away for years. She stepped into the hall, but it didn't feel right. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, too slow, too deliberate. And then, through the darkened hallway, she saw it again. The figure, the same shadow, now standing at the end of the hall, its outline barely visible in the dim light. But this time, it wasn't just watching her. The shadow moved faster than she could comprehend, and before she could react, it reached out and touched her arm. The cold seared through her skin, burning deeper than any frost she'd ever known. Emily screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the silence that followed. The funeral home was quiet again. The lights flickered, then went out. No one saw Emily leave that night. Her shift was supposed to end at dawn, but when the morning staff arrived, they found the funeral home just as it had always been, empty, cold, and silent. The doors were locked, the rooms untouched. But Emily was gone. The question remains, though, what happened to her? Did she simply leave in fear, haunted by the night's events? Or had the shadow claimed her as its own, pulling her into the darkness where the living are never meant to go? The funeral home still stands, just as it always has. But if you walk by it late at night, and if you listen closely, you might hear something, faint whispers in the air, as if someone or something is still trying to call you inside. The shadow never really leaves. It waits, just behind the walls, in the quiet corners, waiting for the next soul to walk through those doors. And when they do, they never really leave. How's the lighting in the room you're in right now? Dim? Flickering? Have you checked behind you in the last few minutes? No reason, just curious. This next story, let's just say it has a way of making quiet spaces feel different. Not many people think about what happens inside a funeral home after the doors close and the last mourner leaves. For Rick, the night shift was the hardest part of his job. Long hours in the quiet, the stillness, the occasional noise that didn't belong. But one night, Rick experienced something so terrifying, so inexplicable, that would change the way he saw his job and the dead forever. This is Rick's story, A story that will make you question what happens when the lights go out and the shadows in the corners start to move. Story, The Last Farewell. It was just another typical night at the funeral home. I had worked the night shift at Greystone Funeral Home for almost a year now. Most of the time, the job was quiet, uneventful. Just me, the embalming room, and the occasional phone call from a family needing information about a funeral service. But I had always felt something was off about the building, especially after hours. The funeral home itself was an old Gothic-style building with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and dark hallways that seemed to stretch forever. The kind of place where the air feels heavy and the silence is just a little too loud. Most nights, I would sit in the back office, waiting for the occasional visitor or phone call. But on this night, I found myself alone. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it. A soft, faint tapping, almost like a knock, coming from the hallway outside. I got up and checked, thinking maybe it was one of the doors rattling, but when I opened the door, there was nothing, just the empty hallway. I turned back to my office, chalking it up to the old building settling. But then it happened again, louder this time. The knock came from the embalming room. I froze. No one else was there. I checked the surveillance cameras. No sign of anyone. My heart was racing now, but I figured it was just nerves. I'd heard stories from the other employees about strange occurrences, things that didn't make sense, but nothing serious. Just rumors, right? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The funeral home felt colder than usual, and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I decided to go check the embalming room, just to be sure. As I walked down the dark hallway, the knocking grew louder, more urgent. I opened the door, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The body on the table wasn't where I had left it. The body of Mr. Wallace, the man we had just embalmed that afternoon, was sitting upright. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead. His mouth was slightly open, like he was about to speak. But he couldn't. He was dead. He should have been dead. I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. The room felt suffocating, and for a moment I couldn't move. Then the whispering started. It was faint at first, like a murmur, but it grew louder, clearer, as if someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. I turned around, but the room was empty, just the dead body of Mr. Wallace, staring at me, unmoving. And that's when I heard it, a low, guttural voice, a whisper that seemed to come from the body itself. "Help me?" I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The body, the dead body of Mr. Wallace, spoke. His lips didn't move, but the voice was unmistakable. I grabbed the phone, ready to call for help, but when I looked back, Mr. Wallace was gone. The body was back on the table, as if nothing had happened. I checked the cameras again. No sign of anyone. No one had entered the embalming room. I was alone that night. I locked every door and stayed in my office, too scared to leave. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, echoing in my mind. Help me? I tried to convince myself it was just stress, maybe even some kind of hallucination. But the next morning, I found something that changed everything. The body of Mr. Wallace, who was supposed to be buried that day, was missing. No one knew where it had gone. There were no signs of it being moved. The only thing I found was a note written in what looked like blood on the embalming table. Help me. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was Mr. Wallace or something else that took his place. All I know is that the funeral home hasn't been the same since. And sometimes when the lights flicker and the silence stretches too long, I hear the whispers again, louder, clearer, coming from the shadows, asking for help. Days passed, but the unease never left. I tried to go about my work, but the funeral home felt different now. It was as if the air itself had changed, like something was lingering in the walls, watching me. The whispers grew louder in my mind, and the feeling of being watched never left. Every corner of the funeral home seemed darker, more suffocating. Every step I took, I half expected to see a figure in the shadows. But it wasn't just in my mind. One evening, as I was going through the usual paperwork, I heard it again, the faint knock, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. The sound came from the back hallway, the one that led to morgue. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just the wind, but as I stood there, the footsteps grew closer, and then the door to the morgue creaked open. I turned around to face it, but the hallway was empty. My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to take a step toward the door. The room was dark, the only light coming from a flickering overhead bulb. But when I stepped inside, something was different. The bodies, the ones we had recently prepared, were all accounted for except for one, the body of Mr. Wallace. The one I had embalmed just days before was back on the table, and this time his eyes were open wide, staring directly at me. I froze. The whispers returned, louder now. "Help me! Help me!" His mouth didn't move, but the voice came from within the room, surrounding me. I couldn't breathe. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in. The lights flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, I could feel his presence, like something was standing right behind me, watching. I turned to face him, and just before I could move, the door slammed shut. The lights went out completely, and I was plunged into darkness. I heard the whispering again, this time from the shadows. A cold, unearthly chill filled the room, and I felt hands on my shoulders. I spun around, but there was no one there. The cold was suffocating, and the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly. The whispering turned into a low growl, and I could feel something moving in the room, something far darker than any of the bodies that lay around me. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the room fell silent. The lights flickered back on, and everything was still. The coldness was gone. The whispering ceased, and the body of Mr. Wallace was back in its place, still and lifeless once again. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I ran out of the morgue and into the main office, locking the door behind me. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew it wasn't. I knew something dark and sinister was in that funeral home, something that had been waiting. And the worst part, I knew it wasn't just Mr. Wallace. The funeral home was a place of the dead, but I'm starting to believe that some of them never truly leave. The next day, when I went back to check the records, I found something even more disturbing. The date on the ledger for Mr. Wallace's burial was different from the one I had written down. It was as if someone had changed it, moved it forward by several days. I thought I was losing my mind, but then I checked the cameras. They had been wiped clean. No footage of Mr. Wallace's body moving, no evidence of anything, just the empty rooms. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm still living in a nightmare or if something far worse is coming for me. But I know one thing for sure, the whispers never stop. And every time I hear them, I feel the cold touch of the dead on my skin, urging me to join them. I don't think I'll be here much longer. And I'm starting to wonder, if I leave, will they follow me? Or is there no escaping once you become part of their world? I didn't know how much longer I could last. Every day felt like a struggle, but every night was worse. The whispers didn't just stay in the funeral home. They followed me home. At first, I thought I could ignore them, brush them off as figments of my imagination. But the whispers were relentless. They were in the walls, in the air, and every corner of my house felt colder, like something was waiting for me to turn around. I had to go back. I knew it. I don't know if it was the guilt or the fear, but something inside me told me I needed to see it through. I needed to confront whatever was haunting the funeral home. So, one night, when the moon was full and the air was thick with that same unnatural cold, I returned. This time, I wasn't just walking to the halls like I had done 100 times before. I was determined. I walked straight to the embalming room, to the morgue, where everything had started. The moment I entered, I knew something had changed. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, a silence that was so loud, it made my ears ring. I could hear the faint echo of my own heartbeat, but it was drowned out by something far worse. The whispers were there, louder than before, swirling in my head, tugging at my sanity. I stepped inside the embalming room, and that's when I saw it. The table was empty. I froze. I didn't know what to think, what to do. The body of Mr. Wallace, gone. But something wasn't right. The room felt colder, much colder than it should have. I could see my breath misting in the air, even though the temperature was normal. And then I heard it, a soft, rasping breath. It wasn't me. I turned to see the figure standing in the corner of the room, a tall, thin silhouette, half hidden in the shadows. The figure stepped forward, and my heart stopped. It was Mr. Wallace. But he wasn't like before. He wasn't the same man who had died. His face was twisted, his skin hanging loosely from his bones, and his eyes. They were hollow, black pits, sucking in the light. His mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, one that shouldn't have been possible for a corpse. "You open the door, Rick," he rasped, his voice a low, guttural growl. "And now you're mine." I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in a room with this thing that was no longer human. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices, all calling my name. They came from the shadows, from the walls, from the very floor beneath me. "Help me! Help me!" The voices echoed, overlapping each other, all coming from the dead who had been trapped in this place. They were angry. They were hungry. "Join us, Rick," Mr. Wallace's voice continued. "You're one of us now." The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could feel the darkness closing in. I knew what I had to do, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to stretch. The shadows deepened, and everything around me felt like it was closing in, like the very room itself was alive, swallowing me whole. I could hear the whispers in my ears, now more like screams, telling me to give in, to accept what had already been done. I had to get out. I had to leave. But when I turned to run, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I tried to force it open, but the door wouldn't budge. The room was suffocating, and I could feel the presence of dead around me. Their eyes were on me, their bodies cold and stiff, reaching for me from the corners, dragging me back into the darkness. In the distance, I saw the figure of Mr. Wallace again, but now he wasn't alone. Other figures stood with him, their faces twisted in agony. The dead had risen, and they were coming for me. "You can't run, Rick," Mr. Wallace hissed. "You're already here with us. You've always been here." I woke up on the cold, tile floor of the embalming room. The lights flickered above me, and I could hear the soft hum of the machines. It was silent, too silent. When I got to my feet, I checked the cameras, but there was no sign of the figures, no sign of anyone. The place was empty, the graveyard still, but I could feel it. I could feel them watching me. They were still here, waiting. I tried to leave again, but something inside told me I was never going to be free. That door I opened wasn't just for Mr. Wallace. It was for all of them. And once you're inside the walls of this place, you never truly leave. Now, every night when I walk the halls, I can hear them. The whispers, the voices, calling me back. And I know sooner or later they will come for me. They always do. Days turned into weeks, but the feeling never left. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them, the figures in the shadows, their hollow eyes following my every move. I tried to go about my day, tried to pretend everything was fine, but I couldn't escape it. The whispers, they were always there, in the walls, in the air, in the very corners of my mind. I thought about quitting. I thought about leaving the funeral home for good, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't solve anything. The dead were never truly gone. Not here. They lingered, watching from the darkness, waiting for the next soul to cross their path. One night, when the full moon was high and the wind howled outside, I received the call. It was late, too late for a routine inquiry, and it came from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering, but when I did, all I could hear was a faint, raspy voice on the other end. It sounded like it was coming from far away, echoing as though the speaker was deep underground. "Rick, come back." The voice was chilling, familiar, yet I couldn't place it. I wanted to hang up, but something in the voice stopped me, made me stay on the line. "You opened the door, Rick. You can't leave now." My breath caught in my throat. The voice was unmistakable. It was Mr. Wallace. But how? I had buried him. He was supposed to be gone. I tried to speak, to demand an explanation, but the line went dead before I could say a word. The whisper started again, louder this time, more urgent. I could hear them, calling to me, taunting me, telling me to come back. It was like they were inside my head, pulling at my thoughts, digging into my mind. They wanted me to return to the funeral home. I couldn't resist. I didn't know how, but the compulsion was too strong. I grabbed my coat, left my apartment without a second thought, and made my way back to Greystone Funeral Home. The night air was thick with fog, and the streets were eerily quiet. I felt like I was walking in a dream, each step pulling me deeper into the nightmare. When I arrived, the funeral home was silent, too silent. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of death and decay hit me immediately. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel them. The dead were here, watching, waiting. I walked the hallways, each step echoing in the silence. The air felt colder with every passing moment, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I made my way to the embalming room, where it all began. The room was dark, but as soon as I stepped inside, the lights flickered on, revealing the table. There was someone on the table. It was Mr. Wallace. His body was no longer decayed, no longer the skeletal form I had seen before. He looked almost alive, his skin smooth, his eyes wide open, staring directly at me. His mouth opened, and the whispering came again, louder than ever. "Join us, Rick. You're one of us now." I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My legs were frozen, my mind racing with terror. I looked around the room, and that's when I saw them. More bodies, more figures standing in the shadows, their eyes fixed on me, their movements slow and deliberate. I stepped back, but my foot caught on the ground, sending me sprawling to the floor. The figures closed in, their eyes never leaving mine. The whispers filled my ears, growing louder, surrounding me, drowning out all other sound. Join us, Rick. Forever. The room seemed to close in around me. The walls moving, shifting, bending. The figures were getting closer. Their hands outstretched, their cold fingers brushing my skin. And I knew in that moment that there was no escape. The door I had opened had led me here, to this place of darkness, to this place of the dead. The last thing I remember is their cold hands gripping me, pulling me toward the table, and then everything went black. I don't know how long I've been here. It feels like time doesn't exist anymore. The funeral home has become my prison, and the dead are my companions. I see them in the shadows, their eyes watching, waiting for the next soul to join them. The whispers never stop. They call my name, pulling me deeper into their world, and I know now that I'll never leave. I'll never escape the funeral home, and I'll never escape the dead. They are always here, always waiting. And as I stand here in the darkness, I hear the door creaking open again. A new soul is entering. Another victim, another lost soul to join us. The cycle continues.